I would like to introduce Russel Olsen, who is the Senior Vice President of Innovations and Product Management at WebPT. Russel, your organization obviously drives a lot of automation initiatives. Can you tell our audiences on how you went about doing this and some key takeaways?
Yeah, I mean, the journey was an interesting one for sure. It definitely started with a manual process, right? Understanding how to migrate data from, one system to another. Yeah, at first it seemed like a simple technology challenge, right? We had both databases. We have, a great engineering staff. We should just be able to pipe the data from one system to the other. And, it came to with a lot of learnings that there's a lot of embedded business logic and process and other things that the data itself wasn't, easy enough to simply migrate. There's a lot of rules that each data set passed through in its own applications. So, we kind of started down the path of necessity. Really was we hired a bunch of people. We hired a bunch of temp workers. We stuck them in a room and they literally manually copied and pasted from one application to another. And I think that was in hindsight, it was necessary. It was something we needed to do to walk through the process, to create the documentation, to understand the flow of data. Now it ended up being expensive because we had to hire, a bunch of temp employees. But as we, got into our planning for the future and kind of what's the next phase, that wasn't a scalable solution. It wasn't something that we could continue to sustain and support. And ultimately long-term value just wasn't there because it was a migration. At the end of the day, all the tools and technology we built to migrate would essentially go away. And we couldn't sustain the pace of hiring temp workers to do this. And, we had to deal with their error rates because they weren't perfect either. So now we had to introduce a QA layer on top of the temporary workers. So, it just wasn't the right scenario. And that's where, we got introduced to RPA and to Automation Anywhere. And we recognized that we could programmatically, through automation, bring the data over and follow the same business rules that were embedded in the applications. And by doing that, we're able to drastically reduce and almost essentially eliminate the temporary workers, but still achieve the end result of moving the data from one system to the other, really at scale.
Now, can you take us through the 3 phases of your automation journey? How you went from start to scale to transform?
I love the 3 pillars, and I love the start because a lot of times you just have to start it, right? You have to have that bias towards action. You have to take the first step, and that first step can a lot of times be squishy. It can be nebulous. It can be super small, but that allows you to see kind of the momentum and gain some success momentum in that, which can then propel you into the transform phase. And really, for us, it's been kind of an eye-opening experience of looking at other processes beyond the one we started with. And then we start seeing throughout the organization a lot of repetitive, mundane processes that are not intellectually stimulating. These are processes that people are, downloading a spreadsheet. They're manipulating that spreadsheet, every week so they can produce a report. And most of the people don't recognize all the mundane steps that took to get to that end result report. They just know that they get a report every Friday, but they didn't realize it took 3 hours to generate that report or 4 hours to collect the data. There's a lot of repetitive tasks that we can get rid of and automate and simplify and do it at a cost that doesn't require us to re-engineer every process, every program, every workflow. And that's really what I'm most excited about is the ability to take a process and at a relatively low cost, automate and scale it and bring it back down to something that is transformative in the organization and ultimately frees up people's time to go do more higher value work.